You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
So yeah, we're sitting here with Donny Dust. Just messaged him on Instagram. We're hanging out now. So I guess, Carlton, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I guess this won't really have an episode number to it. This is something that we just kind of did off the cuff. But welcome to a Life in Ruins podcast. It's me, your host, Carlton Gover, and David Howe. Connor's not with us today. But we have a really special guest here today, Donny Dust, 100% his legal name. And he's a primitive skills expert. Like you just, right. I mean, sell yourself, man. I can't even.
No, right on. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
So down and dirty, I teach primitive skills, wilderness self-reliance all throughout the great state of Colorado, as well as the U.S., Canada, and Europe. So my focus is kind of really knowing more and caring less, and really allowing the individual person to really harness their number one survival skill or thrival skill, and that's just creativity. Yeah. And that's kind of the cornerstone, my philosophy, and my approach to the outdoors. And through that, people experience a whole new walk of life by, empowering their creative side to really just thrive out in the backcountry, out in the mountains, or in a swamp, whether it's employing some sort of ancient technology or something they developed on their own or just kind of thought up in their own process. So yeah, it's a lifelong journey and a passion for sure.
Cool. How'd you get started in all this? Like, were you like this as a kid or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think like, most outdoorsmen that kind of grew up in the outdoors, that was their playground. I spent a lifetime fishing, hiking, hunting, doing a lot of different things. And then probably, I would say around 2000, maybe 2008, 2009, there was kind of like this continuation, but I went back to college for one class, and I was to take an archaeology class.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I wanted to learn more about how everything kind of came to be, how it all got started. And it really boiled down to the archaeology professor really talking about stone tools. Yeah. And that point right there was kind of my wake-up call into saying that's kind of how it all started. I consider flint knapping, working stone tools really to be the first skill.
Yeah.
And from those stone tools, you can create everything. We've used stone far longer than we've used steel.
Right.
So that really led down a pathway of first getting my hands on some good resources, some good stone, and then putting them to work. And then once I understood how they worked, because how you use a stone knife is completely different compared to how you use a steel knife. So once I understood that dynamic and that relationship, I decided to teach myself these skills and really understand them with the intent to thrive with them, ultimately live out in the bush or the backcountry. And my goal was not necessarily to replicate the cultures of ancient times, was to ultimately create my own tools based off my needs. And it's funny, without really having a lot of formal education in it, many of my tools seem to resemble a lot of the ancient tools. So it's almost like it's kind of handed down in certain ways, in certain kind of, mental capacities. But then from there, I wanted to formalize it, and I wanted to make sure that I could impact the world and give back to the masses and kind of promote that creative way of life. That knowing more, caring less, being curious about the world, because we need to be continuously curious. That's why you guys do what you do. You are curious about the ancient past and how it impacts our world today. So that's kind of my same sort of approach and philosophy, how I got started.
Yeah. Well, that's freaking awesome.
No worries.
So you're saying with the stone tools, like when you make the stone tools, they seem to like be similar to modern or stone tools that we would study.
Yeah.
So do you think that has to do with like humans just have a specific, goal? They need to get this thing to cut that, and it kind of just shapes similarly? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I'm going to process out an elk and I have a nice big piece of chert, I want to pull off some real simple flakes, razor sharp flakes that don't really need any sort of pressure flaking or fine tuning. They are in their truest form razor sharp. And that one flake, knowing its cutting capability and how I can hold it, that really impacts how I remove that flake from that spall, and then just start slicing away. And then once I got to get into more of a chop, more of a little bit more aggression, more force, maybe I got to add a little bit more mass behind the stone, give myself a little bit better hand to stone kind of relationship as far as I don't want it to be sharp cutting my hand and then I can start chopping.
Yeah.
Same thing with working a fireboard or a bow or you name it. They just kind of all seem, because I've pulled flakes off and go to open something up and I cut my hand and I'm like, I will never do that again.
Yeah, yeah.
Then I quickly learn to manipulate the stone and get my results that I want. So I think that's kind of how the ancient past did it as well. So
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
right on.
Here you go.
So you've appeared on Discovery Channel for
History Channel.
History Channel.
History
Okay.
Channel, yeah.
And which shows was that?
So I was on the season 6 of the TV show Alone.
Okay.
And then there's a new TV show called Alone the Beast, where Alone is you're by yourself. And then Alone the Beast is you're with 3 other people and they give you one large dead animal. And that's your only resource to basically thrive for 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you get hooked up with the History Channel? Like, how did that come to play?
A couple years ago, I decided to go on to social media. I didn't really want to, and for years I'd never been on it. And then I received some advice saying you should go on it. You could really, impact and expose people to a way of life, a way of thinking, and some really cool methods from the past. So I created the Facebook, or not the Facebook. I like to add the because it's whatever. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. And from there, it just kind of became popular, a lot of followers. And then somebody from the network contacted me and said, we really like your approach. We like your skills. We like that you're far different than most. Would you be interested in joining us on these adventures and going on these shows? And I said, absolutely. So if you're listening, kids, you can still play in the woods as an adult and make a living. So don't give up on those dreams.
That's like, what is one of the most memorable experiences you had on History Channel during one of those shows?
Yeah. I think on the last TV show, Alone the Beast, I think one of the best experiences was really just having a certain level of confidence. So being out in the bush, giving this one large dead animal, I felt comfortable. I wasn't alarmed. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared because I knew what I had to do. And that dead hog, that beast, was going to give me everything I needed. So it was kind of like a culmination of years of practice and studies and applications out in the bush on my own to kind of put it to a test where I knew everything I needed and everything I had was there. And I actually got to do it in a capacity aside from like influencing my own outcomes. Because, somebody can go camping for a weekend and bring all the things they need to sustain for that weekend. But when someone says, now I'm in control and I'm going to take all those things away from you, but just give you this one thing, that's where that test kind of comes into play. So having that test and being able to actually be tested was pretty awesome. And then just good camaraderie between the other folks and camera and everything. It's pretty awesome.
That's amazing. Is there one environment that you particularly struggle in or find it hard to?
Yeah, I would say if I had to pick an environment that is a little bit more difficult, I think a swamp is a difficult environment.
Really?
Yes. So as a flint napper, the one thing that doesn't exist in a swamp is stone.
Okay.
So they put me in the environment where they're like the one resource that I can do a lot with did not exist. There wasn't even sand, not even sand to collect, dry out, and use to grind against. Nothing. So I was really at a loss, but I quickly adapted to the environment and quickly realized since there's no stone in this environment, and I know like geologically there's some quartzite veins that run deep underneath the ground, but I wasn't going to be able to get to those.
Right.
There's no exposure points. So I knew the next hardest thing in that terrain was the bones of the hog. So even the wood there is rotten, it's saturated, it's relatively soft. You have some cypress, but do you know how to cut down a tree with no axe?
No.
Yes, you can burn cut it, right? So you take clay, you wrap it around the trunk, you light a fire underneath the tree, the fire burns the trunk, it doesn't burn the clay, and then it falls over. So you understand you can use fire as a tool, but that chopping quick everyday tool, that pocket, that multi-tool was going to be the bones or the cutters of that actual hog. So not having stone was a completely just, it's like, oh my gosh, I knew they were going to do this. And then you adapt, you overcome, you use the bones and use fire.
Mm-hmm. And you have a film crew with you the entire time. So they're just sitting there. They're not helping you at all.
Nothing.
They're just up in your face.
Yeah, I mean, they're awesome. They're there. They're capturing your entire journey to put it, 30 days into a 42-minute episode. So there's a lot of things that won't be shown. I mean, there's days where I would sit next to a fire with a shell and I would shape my atlatl with it. And it would take 3 days to do it because there's no cutting. And I would, burn it to shape initially, but then it was the fine tuning of putting the good spur on there and making sure the handle was right. So when you have time, you use time, and the camera crew just follows your journey, captures it all. Every once in a while, they might say, hey, move a little bit to the left. That's the good light. Yeah. And then you look like a rock star because the light shines and the hair is flowing. So that happens every once in a while. But yeah, there's no real interactions. I mean, you might be able to there's always safety that's, at a distance, and it's an entire production. So the idea is to capture the journey, and it's a very authentic journey. I mean, there's no sleeping bags, there's nothing, so I slept in a grass hut. I took Spanish moss. After removing the mites and smoking the mites from the Spanish moss, I started to twist it together to make some sort of kind of like linen or woven materials, laid on that, and then used use the Spanish moss as a blanket, using grasses and palm fronds. Even in a swamp, the water table is so high, you build a fire, it dry pushes the water down, fire goes out, sucks it right back up, that water. And then you realize all my fires are shorter in burn time, and the coals don't last as long. So you don't know that going in, but you quickly realize, how can I adapt and overcome? So then you take clay, you make giant clay tablets, put those on the ground, start building your fires on top of that clay. There's no water. You didn't have water there's no pots to boil water. So we had to dig from the swamp's edge, a seep well. The water would go through the ground, and then we lined it with clay. And then we would drink from that water. We built rain catches to catch rainwater, made crayfish traps out of vines and different pieces of river cane. And, you go out there and you adapt. You'd be surprised how quickly you could adapt if your mind is open. If you're closed off and say, I can't do this, then you're going to, ultimately fail. But if you go out there and say, all right, the land already has everything I need. Cultures of the past have existed. Granted, some of those cultures brought their stone in. I just want to clarify that. Everyone hear that? They bring the stone in. Everything already exists. You just got to go there open mind, and the answers will reveal themselves. It's really just kind of really reconnecting with nature and understanding that it holds the power you need, and it will show you the way.
In like a swamp environment, when they put you that, I've always wondered this, is it really difficult to make fire since it's all wet? Yeah, absolutely. It's very difficult because when the moisture in the air keeps everything wet, everything's kind of saturated. And a lot of the woods there, they kind of battle the water too. So they don't want to be oversaturated, but there's a level of moisture on them. So you have to kind of think like the animals. Where would a raccoon hide? Where would a possum hide? They're going to hide in the most driest spots possible. So you look for those opportunities, right? Kind of the environment shows you, and then you can resource that wood that maybe they would climb up inside of a burrow as a fire, making a friction fire set. And out there, you have got all sorts of different woods. But you have cypress, you have your canes, you have some oaks, you have black willow, you have palmetto. So once you experiment with those woods, you find out what's going to work really well and what's not going to work. Once you have a good fire set or a good fire kit that's working, you safeguard it. You keep it alive. You make sure that it's protected at all costs, because if your fire goes out and you're 20 days into one of these challenges or an adventure, you're deprived of calories, you're hungry, you're tired. It's that much harder to make a fire. I imagine. Yeah. Okay. And I guess this is going to sound weird, but I had read that people in Papua New Guinea use like a rope to friction fire. Yeah. Is that something you've done before? Or do you kind of just do like the regular, like rubbing it on a log? So there's a lot of different friction fire methods in a lot of cultures based on the woods and the environments kind of dictate certain outcomes. The more popular one is a hand drill friction fire. So you have a hearth board and then a spindle. The spindle you manipulate between your hands, applying downward pressure and constant rotation. And that will create enough friction. And through that friction and the pressure applied downward, it will remove wood from the hearth board. And that hearth board will ultimately create a type of like sawdust. And that sawdust will become dark and black. It will condense, it will superheat and form a coal. So just like the hand drill friction fire set, you have different fire plows where you're pushing fire. You have bow drills. You have fire saws where it's more of a sawing-like mechanism. And then in like Papua New Guinea, they're using like a fire cord where it's creating that same sort of friction. The cordage isn't breaking away or anything. It's just removing that mass, superheating, condensing, and forming that coal. So to really practice a lot of these skills, you have to be well-versed in multiple aspects of fire making and understand how they all kind of play out together.
Hey, Devin.
Hey, Devin.
Hey, Devin.
So for the audience, Devin Pettigrew, a Ph.D. student here at Boulder, has joined us. Devin does experimental tech, and this is his first time meeting Donnie. And we're super excited to have him here. We were just talking about his time on the show Alone and Alone the Beast and different fire making techniques. And one of Donnie's, when we asked him the most troublesome environment he's been in, he said the swamp, because there was a lack of stone tools available.
I can totally see that.
Yeah, so I mean, is there anything you like? I mean, Donnie has brought a bunch of his tools here that we thought that you would definitely appreciate. We were telling him a bit about your research, and later he wants to see your toys and goodies downstairs.
All right.
Yeah.
Devin says, thanks. I didn't realize how much of a complete wuss I was. So.
You grow your planet, my friend.
So do you have like a question? I mean, you're more versed in the experimental stuff than we are in terms of different techniques and, ancient tech.
I think what's interesting to me is hunting with stone tools.
Absolutely.
Because I can do carcass experiments and see how they penetrate and the different weapons work. Yeah. What you don't get from that is because you have to kill the animal humanely before you run the experiment.
Sure.
And then you got to consume it afterwards, try and make as much use of that as possible. But you don't get to see actually how does it perform in a hunting situation where you're trying to kill the animal as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well,
so you have an experience with that?
Yeah. So I hunt with an atlatl, primitive bow. I hunt hogs, deer, and this is based on state by state, regulation to regulation, private property, public lands. And I think a hog is a good example of one of those things. So unlike modern hunters, we try to have an ethical kill. Hunter gatherers are not ethical. There might have been a spiritual context in how they took their game and the importance of it. But a stone point is designed to create trauma, mass bleed out. As it enters the flesh and that animal starts to run away, it incisors and causes that bleed out. That's the brutality of it, but that's also the beauty of it. That's a technology that will take a 4-bladed razor point, put it through an animal, shoot it through the animal, and then that deer will run off for 3.5 miles. But if I take a stone point, put it through the gut of a hog because I can't get through his shield, his intestines rip out. He bleeds to death in like 50 feet. His intestines are on the ground. I've got a meal. So there's kind of the reverse. We don't have to be ethical as hunter-gatherers. Today we have to. So when you employ stone tools or you look at some of the hunting methodologies of the past and you apply them in today, they just don't really mirror up so much.
So you're telling you run a hog hunting kind of, I wouldn't even just a hunting trip down in Texas.
Correct.
So could you explain what that hog shield is and why you go for the guts in that case?
Absolutely, yeah. So to back it up, I offer a variety of courses. One of them is a 2-day atlatl build and then a 2-day hog hunt. And the idea is to get 8 to 10 people, form into 2 groups, to hunting parties with their atlatls and push and drive hogs, flush hogs to another party, and then take those hogs out with atlatls in a group effort. Now, most of your big hogs, they have what's called a shield. And it's a layer of fat that kind of protects their neck, and it goes down around their shoulders. And sometimes that shield will even trickle down into around their ribs. So that is maybe an evolutionary thing after they've been fighting and using their razors and their stuff. That's how they protect themselves.
Yeah, it's got a pretty small thoracic cavity for the target that you can actually hit.
Exactly.
Like what you typically aim at on a deer, elk or something is the thoracic, the area that contains the lungs and the heart. And then right behind the diaphragm, you have basically what we would call like the gut area.
Yeah.
that you typically wouldn't want to hit. If you do hit right behind it, you can still kill an animal fairly quickly if you have an effective point. And it sounds like you're saying like stone points are very effective. I've actually read a few ethnographic accounts where people are saying after they started getting trade points, like metal points, they were more durable, but they weren't more effective at dropping an animal quickly. Absolutely. Which is really interesting. And I was just thinking about how little has been done to fully understand that.
No, for sure. And the idea of hunting a hog is it's really knowing your prey. So if you're hunting a hog and you're going to try and go for a shot, you have to be able to put the animal down. Yeah. Going for an elk or a mule deer or even a whitetail, you're going behind the shoulder blade, aiming for the thoracic cavity. So there's just that a lot of modern hunters, they'll have an overpowered bow. They'll have an 80-pound bow and they'll shoot it at 20 yards and the arrow goes through. Yep. And that's really just kind of overdoing it. And that animal can, razor sharp closeout, it can close and run. And I've heard hunters say, I shot a mule deer once and tracked a blood trail for like 5 hours. And I think to myself, I'm like, that's a pretty bad shot. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, the great thing about stone points, it is trauma. It is designed to slice and dice and create that opening. And that's the science. I'm not like you gents, but having stuck many points in the side of animal, that's what it does. Without it, an atlatl foreshaft is not going to go through the side of a mule deer. It's going to stick, it's going to pop, it's going to drop. And as it runs away, it just creates a cavity of chaos. And the hunting market has adopted a new kind of point. They call them these like toxic points, and they're almost circular razors. So when it makes entry, it slices and dices and creates a decent sized cavity. The same size cavity that a nice, atlatl, with a good foreshaft with a nice point would do.
A dart point.
Exactly.
Yep. They're big.
It's perfect.
So they definitely create a lot of trauma. Yeah, that's very interesting. From what I've seen, darts don't penetrate as deeply, but they, as an arrow, which is smaller, has a lot more kinetic energy, or it can have. Darts can also have a lot of kinetic energy, but they have that larger cutting head, and they just create a lot of trauma when they hit.
Absolutely. And I find that some of the darts and some of the foreshafts people create, they create kind of a negative effect. They'll have a very nice point, and they'll have a very bulbous connection point, whether it's wrapped with sinew or whether it's wrapped with some sort of hide glue or even some sort of pitch, and then it really creates a stopping point. It has to be almost a very seamless transition. And there's like certain styles of points I like to use because I can achieve that initial small entry, gain gap through the ribs, get to the cavities that I need to, and go from there.
Yeah, that's come up a lot in carcass experiments. Is if you don't have, and this is the case, a lot of people who like make these or do these experiments aren't as versed in designing the projectile in the first place. If you have those kind of bulky transitions, it's going to stop it almost every time.
You hit one rib, it's already lost that kinetic force. For sure.
If you have a short foreshaft, that's as deep as it's going to go. If you have like a shoulder at the socket. What's interesting is when some cultures did that on purpose, like in the southwestern U.S. is the case, where they actually seem to have purposefully had a foreshaft that's kind of loosely fit into the main shaft of the dart. If you don't do it just right, it actually falls out in flight, which is really annoying. Yeah. Usually your foreshaft gets lost. But then they had this shoulder at the socket. So they didn't actually want it to penetrate farther than the foreshaft. And since it's such a loose connection there, it punches in, the main shaft stops, and as soon as that animal starts running, the main shaft drops.
Perfect.
And you can get it. And there are these really interesting cases of independent development of that with arrows as well.
Right on. Yeah.
In Africa, that's how the San Bushmen hunt. Their arrows are designed the same way. Aleutian Islanders had poison foreshafts that fit into dart main shafts the same way. So
absolutely.
It's pretty cool.
And I think one thing that really complements that idea is that some of the things we call bird points, I would never hunt a bird with a bird point. I would cover it with poison or just make entry and allow the dart that point to do its work.
Yeah.
One type of foreshaft, I don't know, maybe you guys can speak to this. I created what I call an overshaft with a wadding. So I'll take bison hair and I'll have my foreshaft cavity and I'll wad it with bison hair and it sticks out the sides. And I'll stick my foreshaft into it. So then when it makes impact, I won't blow out my foreshaft. It won't pressure fit. And then it's also nice and loose. So it sticks in tight. It makes hard entry, but then it also just releases like it's... I have some photos.
It's a cool
I can
trick.
show you.
Yeah. Never heard of that.
Yeah, I don't. It was just like I said. Some of my stuff after doing it, you're like, God, these things are not coming out because if you throw it 75 yards and that kinetic energy hits, it's just like it just heats itself up and it locks itself in.
It drives the foreshaft really hard into the main shaft. And you have this binding around the socket so that the socket that you've drilled into the end of the main shaft actually gives a little bit. So when you fit in the foreshaft, it has a snug fit. But if it gets jammed in there, man, it's like,
you hit a shoulder blade,
that
thing's gonna blow out.
And that's not good. If your point's broken, you're like, crap, there's still bison running around. I need to fit in a new foreshaft.
Exactly. So I have some photos. I'd
like to see that.
Give you a perspective of what it looks like.
Back to, you just mentioned bird points. Which are, have you guys talked about bird points?
No.
Okay, so it's interesting that in North America we have, in later times when people have adopted the bow, these tiny little projectile points.
The beginning of your pinky.
And it's like as big as your fingernail on your pinky. And so collectors for a long time have called those bird points because they thought that's what they were for. Like what else would you hunt with that? But obviously if you're going to kill a bird, and it's like a small bird that you're not trying to punch through and penetrate into the body cavity, you're going to use like a blunt tip on your projectile to just knock it unconscious or kill it outright like that. So they weren't, that's not what they were hunting with them. They were hunting deer and things like that. Absolutely. With these tiny little points.
Yeah. Most of the whole, I think bird point is a very easy thing because it's just an easy way to explain the size and the relation to the actual target. But like I hunt with you heard of like Mookie marbles out in Utah. They're these naturally geoformed marbles. And I will glue it right to the front using pine pitch, and all it is just blunt force trauma. And if you you can throw a rock at a quail or even like some ptarmigan and kill it, but you hit it with the Mookie and it just explodes the heart, which you want to eat that, that's good. But you're going to wind up getting a kill without causing mash trauma to the entire bird. Yeah. So it's kind of cool. But the bird point's definitely for deer. Yeah. Definitely, without a doubt. It's funny I always get a kick when people say, that's a bird point. I'm like, well, maybe not. Maybe like an emu or something like that, possibly.
Right. But maybe for a turkey. I don't even know that. Turkeys are pretty resilient birds. I hear that hunting them with a bow is very challenging.
It is, I can tell you. I love hunting turkey. The fall time, the wintertime turkeys. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, if you're using a shotgun, you just aim for the head. If you're using a bow, you got to aim for some sort of vitals because it will keep moving and you got to run out there and grab it by the neck and start cranking away. So I don't know if this is a style point. I should have brought it, but it's actually a whale's tail coming out. So it's a point that if you were to take a whale's tail for those listening and point it at the actual critter, it has two razor sharp edges. So it'll hopefully scoop a section of the neck and cut it and at least stop its movement. So then you could.
So it's like a crescent shaped stone tip.
Exactly. Almost like those tattoos. It's a crescent with a long stem that you just haft. And
have you?
The Channel Islands of California.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you heard of the archaeological and ethnographic examples of those?
No.
Because there's a lot.
Is there?
Yeah. Not just in the Americas. He's talking about in the Channel Islands. They've made those. And there have been a lot of theories as to what they were used for.
Okay.
But you also see them in the old world and starting in Africa, potentially as far back as 70,000 years ago.
Wow.
And that they seem to have been tipped well, you have these transverse arrowheads.
Yeah, I love those.
That's
those
just
flat
like
tips. Those are the best.
Yeah, it's just a straight blade, straight across, totally perpendicular to the shaft of the arrow. And it's like
a trapezoid.
You look at it and you're like, that doesn't look like
ruthless
an arrow that would work, yet,
oh my god,
oh yeah, they've been found lodged in the vertebra of red deer in Europe. So they were using to hunt big game.
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
You tested one on the goat.
I did, yeah. I tested 2 on the goat.
Right on.
So those appear pretty early, and there are hafted examples of those from Egyptian tombs.
Okay.
But there are these funky, what we call microliths usually, or backed bladelets. You often hear them called as well, where what they're utilizing is the natural edge of the flake. You know, you drive it off and you get these really sharp edges, and then you retouch it, and that's where they've retouched on these is actually the backed portion. That's where you hafted up against the shaft.
Gotcha.
And some of these things from Southern Africa. Whoa, those are cool. I'll have to show those on here.
Yeah, I'll put those on Instagram.
Yeah, I'll get a bunch more for you.
Some of those from Southern Africa, the best guess is that they're projectile points for either at-level darts or arrows, and that's how they were hafted.
Yeah,
I mean,
I love the simple hafting mechanisms because any flake removed off a spall, even if it's like a microlith, it's gnarly at its finest.
Super sharp.
Oh, you put that anywhere in your own body, you're gonna wind up feeling it. So there's a transverse right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Standard transverse.
Yep.
And those will do damage.
And a bone point?
So I like to use bone sometimes for bird to small game because they are durable, but they're also not going to destroy everything. And that's kind of that's wadding. So those are over shafts.
Okay.
So it's actually a hollowed out piece of wood, and that's the connection. So if you're going to blow anything out, that's going to blow out, and you're not going to lose your dart. You're not going to, send a shockwave down your dart, as well as be able to retain it. And you can do that an overshaft mechanism with a lot of various darts, but you can also do the wadding method with pretty much any foreshaft. It just gives you a little bit of cushion and eliminates that like heating and pressure.
Yeah, having that it's like a sleeve.
Pretty much
fits over and connects the two shafts. That's a really good way to connect pieces, especially if you use like a
cane.
Yeah, a cane dart, or they did it commonly, I think, with Phragmites because it's so reed in the Great Basin because it's so fragile.
Sure.
So it's stronger if you put that sleeve over to connect the shafts. But it works really well with a beveled connection, what you call like a scarf joint, where you have your two shafts, the foreshaft and the main shaft, or whatever parts of the shaft that you're joining, are beveled in opposite ways, and they just fit up against each other, and then you have that sleeve over them.
Holds it in place.
Yeah, and that creates this setup where you can actually have a dart that you can take apart into multiple pieces.
Right on.
And that's a really common joinery technique in the old world, going way back, but definitely during like the Magdalenian period, where they're primarily hunting reindeer and they're using the atlatl. And you see that with these osseous tips, like antler. Reindeer antler is really good. Yeah. They use red deer antler. They use bone. They often utilize that scarf joint technique, and you see that carry over across into the New World at the end of the Pleistocene with these Clovis, what people often call Clovis bone rods.
I'm like a kid in Kansas.
And at least some of those Clovis bone rods are those Sagae points that they were using in Europe.
For sure.
As well. So they came from Europe all the way across to
right on.
All the way across Siberia into the New World.
Yeah, some of those techniques, they're very easy to replicate and reproduce with like modern tools. And I think that's one of my approaches is if I can't craft it from using bone or stone, I try to avoid it because it comes down to a couple of different things. Like a personal way, I call it honoring the hunt. I feel like if I can create things from the landscape and then turn around and take game with it, it's a way to honor that hunt, to do it on foot, sometimes barefoot with moccasins, sandals, and a breechcloth. And that's kind of a little bit more, my style. But the things that I create and the stone tools like you're speaking of. If people would embrace some of our older ways, they would realize that their hunting capabilities would I personally believe would go up like tenfold.
I agree.
It's amazing what one small stone point will do to the side of an animal.
I think what we often miss, what hunters often miss, if there's any hunters listening, is hunting is one of those things, one of those aspects of our culture that doesn't necessarily improve with modernity.
Very true.
Like you add on better and better technology, and it gets easier and easier. And the animal, we also have to consider what the experience is of the animals of being hunted with, these kind of firearms versus having predators that you can actually see and then get away from.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's not necessarily better with better technology.
I don't cover myself in deer urine or anything like that. My grandfather probably smoked a Marlboro Red wearing the same shirt you're wearing when he was hunting and did perfectly fine. So.
What's the name of your school down in Texas where you hunt these hogs with atlatls?
So I run a school and travel throughout. So I call it Paleo Tracks Survival.
Paleo Tracks Survival.
It's kind of the old way of survival, thrival. It's really wilderness self-reliance school, and it's online, paleotracksurvival.com, and it's a pretty good school. I run a variety of classes. Most of them are August, September, over hunting seasons. Those are the hunter-gatherer classes. And then I do a stone tool technologies class where it's 3 days. I take people and I give them a variety of stone tools, because in order to truly understand how to make stone tools, you have to use them first.
Right.
You have to understand how you hold them, how you manipulate them, how a raw flake cuts into flesh, how you hold a chopper, how you utilize a scraper to process hide. So we use a lot of tools up front, and then we spend the next day and a half creating some very baseline stone toolkits. And then we go out into the bush and we put those kits to work to make simple shelters, fire kits, harvest some game, and live how we're supposed to.
Cool. You think we could write a grant to send 15 archaeologists to this school to do a gang atlatl hunt?
Yeah. Friends and family discount. I'll hook you up. No worries.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, the atlatl hunts are typically down in Texas. So you hunt invasive species. Like here we hunt coyotes.
Right.
That's our invasive. So that's one that you can hunt with an atlatl. And I've taken those out of my backyard with atlatls and bows, and they're good. Hogs are huge.
People want to get rid of hogs real bad so you can hunt them all year round.
Oh yeah. That's the easiest. I love hunting hogs because they'll get you. They'll come at you. It's like you truly have to hunt it. You can't. You always want to hunt close to a tree in case it does come at you. You can like grab that branch and drop your kit and hold on. But if you're a good shot and there's enough of you, like one of the last groups I brought out, there was about 7 of us, and we walked high and low. We looked everywhere around, and we could hear them in the distance, but they were just smarter than us. And eventually we started spreading out, and we took a couple turtles and ate turtle eggs, which was good too. I like turtles. Yeah. Boil them out in their own shell. They burn out, but it's good eating.
What's the average age of people that take classes in your school?
Yeah. I'd say anywhere 18 to 65.
Really?
All sorts of ages, family groups, corporate events. Executives will come out and they'll say, I want to walk wild. And I say, well, let's start walking. People from Canada, UK, weather scientists, people that work for NOAA, moms, dads, husbands, wives, anybody, everybody. And because my school is not necessarily about, it is about survival, but it's about self-reliance in the woods. That's the goal. And my idea of that self-reliance is knowing more, caring less, and everything already exists out in the bush. And some of the easiest tools you can create can be a simple stone flake is a perfect example of a beautiful knife.
Okay.
What is like the average like skill level of the people? Like, have they ever been out in the woods before, or do they kind of know what they're doing? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. All skill levels. Most people that want to do like a 3-day, they're relatively new. Some folks that want to go out for 10, even 21 days. They've run through a couple courses. They've maybe crafted their own bow, and they want to kind of put themselves to the test with some mentorship and guidance and some instruction along the way. But I've had folks come out for 10 days that know absolutely nothing. And the only gear requirements I have is a blade, a blanket, and a bottle. Those are the 3 hardest things to replicate in the bush. and then everything else comes from that. Yeah.
Amazing.
Creating a knife, creating a blanket, and creating something to boil water in is hard to do. It's doable. You can do burn bowls and make clay pots and a variety of things, but firing clays, is that there's an art form to it, and then hand sifting all of your clay and pulling out all your particulates. It's getting your temps right. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, so there's a lot of ages that go to it. A lot of people are just wanting to experience something, kind of a rewilding, if you will. And I'm happy to be part of their journey.
Yeah. I had a question that's kind of not related to, or I guess it is related to that, but if there's something, so I've never, I didn't live in the Paleolithic, and I don't go outside that deep in the woods that too much, but like, what is something about ancient humans that like we might not know? Like, what's something you found out through doing all this, like about ancient people, like the way they make tools, how they are like living in the woods? Like, have you come up with like a cool?
I think they were probably some of the best problem solvers.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, because there's so many things we just take for granted, the clothes on our back, but to know the proper methods to tan a hide proportionally to fats. Mm-hmm. How many years that could have taken, or it could have taken one lady who spilled something at one point and was like, oh, this is amazing. Or how, like the archer's paradox on a bow, how that arrow bends around the bow. And then there's so many of those sort of things, that problem solving that modern people, we are very creative in different forms, but those early forms of creativity, I like to experience it sometimes. Like, I don't know everything. I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll be out in the bush and something will come to me, and I'm like, oh, is this brand new? Did I just think of this?
Yeah.
Probably not, but somebody else, a couple thousand years ago, was sitting in that same spot and saying, holy cow, I just thought of this, and now it's changed my life.
Yeah.
So without a doubt, super creative.
Yeah, a couple things that you said there that made me thought. First is hide tanning, and then second, when you're making this equipment, I've found time and time again that I've my experience trying to make little darts, trying to flint knap, trying to make fire. When you start looking at museum collections, things that have come out of the archaeological record, you look at it and it just looks familiar.
Yeah,
you look at it and you're like,
I did that.
I know exactly why they made the shaft like with that kind of taper to it, or made the main shaft in that way. And I understand the process that it took to make that. And the amount of effort and what kind of tools you would have to use to reproduce that. Whereas if you don't have that experience trying to replicate artifacts, or even like experiment on your own, like you're saying, mm-hmm. it's just so much harder to interpret what you're seeing from the archaeological record. Sure. And you see tons in the literature of misinterpretations,
absolutely,
misrepresentations, and people it's just very clear when people don't have that experience.
For sure. And
they're trying to interpret artifacts. So from an archaeological perspective, it's an invaluable tool.
Absolutely.
And then to come back to hide tanning, this is really nice work.
Oh, thanks.
I've done some hide tanning. I've never tanned a hair-on deer hide. This is very soft, very pliable for a hair-on hide. It is a science project.
Oh. Yeah.
It is. You have to do everything just right if you don't want to make a huge amount of work for yourself.
Absolutely.
But yet there's so many different ways to go about doing it.
Absolutely.
But if you actually want to produce a hide that's of high quality, what you better do is find somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And follow their instructions to the T.
Absolutely.
So that is one. That's like a really good example of what you're talking about. One way in which people, it's very clear how intelligent and clever they were and what good problem solvers they were.
Yeah. I think it's just beautiful. Really.
Viewers, I'm asking if they have any questions for Donnie.
Sure.
Any questions?
Is this brain tan?
Brain tan, yeah. Unfortunately, I have a nice relationship with a lady named Teresa Camper, and she's probably one of the world's best hide tanners. Her Ph.D., her doctorate is just in ancient methodologies so she is the master. Like, I'll call her up and be like, quick question.
Nice.
What do I got to do? And knowing that is invaluable, and then being ensured that I can share that same sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a wonderful resource to have as somebody who's really put a lot of effort into hide tanning. And there are people, this is what they've done for their life, is just trying to understand different ways of hide tanning.
Yeah, for sure.
So just for our listeners real quick, we're interviewing Donny Dust, who is a primitive survival expert. We also have my colleague, Devin Pettigrew, who's a Ph.D. student in ancient weapons technology. So we're doing a live stream on Instagram, and we're also recording this for our podcast. So if anyone who's on Instagram have any questions for Donnie, please just drop them and we'll read it to him and we'll see what he has to answer. He's a really cool guy. He's been great. This has been so much fun. And it's great having Devin here because like you guys can really go back out because like this is the way outside my wheelhouse. I'm just like, wow, these are some cool skins and some cool tech. Like I haven't seen a ads before that's been redone, and and your otter skin quiver is nuts.
Oh, thanks.
Like I'm trying to get my hands on some otter right now, but like
this is an Ishi style quiver, right?
Similar, yeah.
Pretty similar.
Just you sew his face shut, you keep the tail, and then you pack some pine pitch in case you got to repair anything. You just heat it and smear it, so you have your own repair kit there for anything. And
cool.
Yeah, that's like probably several years old.
Just like Ishi's quiver.
Yeah, I mean the cool thing is it's waterproof, and depending on the number of arrows you put in there, it can be pretty darn quiet. You know, so whether you're hand packing them, 2 on the bow, 2 inside the quiver, however you go about doing it. But it's really, I mean, if you can case skin something, like an otter, or in case skinning is where you basically remove the hide like a sock, and sew the mouth shut, and away you go. I mean, the last bear I took, I kept his pads on, his claws in, nose, eyelids, ears, after you remove the cartilage. Most of the things I like to case skin because people enjoy them, and you can turn them into a variety of things: pouches, quivers, so on and so forth.
So,
question.
Luke Frazier asks, how do I start to learn primitive skills?
Yeah.
So you have the school. If you want to
yeah. So Luke, you can definitely you can go to Paleo Tracks Survival.com, and I have a variety of courses run there. But the best thing to do is just get out in the bush. And just start experimenting, start playing around, figure out what's there. And depending where you're at geographically, there has been a culture that has existed there. Yeah. They are the pioneers for understanding how that environment works, how to thrive within that environment. So pick up books, read it. I grew up in an era where there wasn't YouTube. You had to reach out to experts. You had to read books and be curious. Yeah. And that has led me down a pathway of just some amazing experiences. So be curious, get outside, read a whole bunch of books. On my website, I list out tons of books that are in ancestral skills, first skills, you name it, it's there. So yeah, check it out.
How many books have you published?
I published one book called Scavenger. That's a primal approach to lifestyle change. It's focusing on a couple methodologies to like make oneself better. And then I have another book coming out called Earthroamer, and that goes into how I go out in the bush for extended periods of time and place to place, and no real plans, just letting curiosity guide me and some of my fundamentals and principles. And then I have a third book I'm working on called Lithic Survival. And Lithic Survival is taking survival skills and define lithic arts and incorporating them together. So the old analogy, what would you do if you didn't have a knife in a survival situation? This is really going into creating some of those first tools and then showing you how to use those tools in a variety of situations. Because using a stone flake is not the same as using a knife.
Yeah,
so,
they work in very different ways.
Yeah.
I think that's come up before where, for example, I was on an internet forum. Internet forums are also good resources in addition to books, but that's like I grew up in the era of internet forums, early ones. Somebody was talking about how Ishi made his bow and said, I just assumed he would have used his knife. No, stone knives are not great for whittling wood.
Yeah.
So they function in totally different ways. I would just add to that, like at some point you just have to try.
Yeah.
Like what you're saying. This comes up for me with hunting. People talk about hunting with the bow and arrow and how challenging it is. And you have to start with like a compound bow and then gradually. No, just pick up a wood bow and just try.
Yeah.
Like at some point, you just have to go back in your backyard, shoot some arrows, and then when hunting season rolls around if you're comfortable enough that you can hit the target regularly, go out in the woods and try to hunt.
Yeah.
And it's that process of continually trying, quite often failing, and then going back and looking at the resources, reading the books, reading the things online. It's just that long-term, extended, just keep trying it.
Yeah. Life's journey.
Yeah. That's how you're going to pick up these kinds of tools.
You said a second ago, like someone has lived in that spot before in history and they like have lived through it kind of thing. That's another cool thing I think about archaeology is like, why should we study it and things like that. I would have had, if you dropped me in Wyoming last year when I was 8 years old, I would have died like immediately. But knowing how people lived in the plains for that long, like for tens of thousands of years, just by reading about archaeology and how like what they were eating, how they built their structures, like you'd have a better chance of surviving there knowing that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's like super cool. I've never heard someone say that way. So that's a cool way to put it.
Yeah, it's a valid point for sure.
I'm super stoked. And Lana, if you keep helping out our guests or the people that follow, we're going to have to start paying you. Yeah, that guy is super stoked.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dude, what time is it? We've been like, time's been flying by. Yeah, no, this is great. Yeah, I guess. We usually just do hour episodes. So what's been the most, because you've been doing this for what, how long? 20 years?
About 20 years.
Yeah, about 20 years. What was your worst experience, or probably maybe not worst is the right way to put it, but like difficult experience you've had outside the swamp, like just
So getting sick is always difficult.
Really?
And there's kind of a backstory to some of these, but for a couple of years, someone dared me. I couldn't live as a vegan, so I tried it out. I did it, but one thing it forced me to do was remove an entire food palette, offering from my world and focus on plants. So as you remove one, you can only focus on the other. And through that, I understood and gained a great deal of knowledge on medicinal plants, tooling plants, resource-based plants. And from that, I've learned a lot about how to treat certain ailments out in the bush. And sometimes I will say some of the stuff that creeps up into my body, whether it's, dysentery or some sort of Giardia, Cryptosporidium, anything, sometimes the bush just is not the best place. And getting sick outside is horrible. Like, I'll get a little, not overly graphic, but like, you got the runs. What do you wipe your butt with? Is probably a stone or a stick or a handful. You do that 20, 30 times, you're dehydrated, you're trying to rehydrate, you don't feel well, you're not crawling into a nice bed, you're laying on some buffalo robes. Yeah, it's that's when things become really difficult when you're sick, and especially when you're 3 days out and you're sick and you got to walk back in. Being sick in the bush is one of those things that will definitely change your perspective and force you to increase your knowledge on what plants work. Like yarrow is a great plant out here that works exceptionally well. There's so many plants that offer a little bit of something, and once you know those, you feel like you're armed and ready. So
you went vegan, and now as we were walking up here, this stuff in, now you're on an all meat diet.
Yes. So I'm on my 24th day of a pure meat diet, and that's organ meats, all my own hunted meats, some store-bought meats, and then just some like random meats. So yeah, organ meats, liver. I love liver. I love heart, tripe, lots of fats. So store-bought game fowl, an elk, you name it, if I can eat it. And there's no dairy involved, no cheeses. It's just straight meat, and I feel great. Probably lost 8 or 9 pounds. I sleep soundly, and this is more of an experiment. My entire findings I've been keeping track of financially, my blood pressure, my O2 levels. There's a lot of science going into it because there's not a lot of information about the cultures that used to eat meat. So you take the Inuit, they're not eating stuff that might have eaten the undigested like grass and stuff from a stomach, but they're not getting the same sort of vitamins. Yeah. So they did perfectly fine. And there's some papers that I've read they have lower blood pressure and all sorts of stuff. So I'm trying to experiment on my own. Just this past week, I started eating some of the raw meats to regain some vitamin C, and just kind of experimenting, a lot of bone broths, some marrow, things like that. And so I've been keeping track of it all, moods, feelings, weights, energy levels, trying to paint somewhat of a picture to those wanting to experiment with this. This is kind of, how I feel. This is And I'm ravenous 99% of the time. Like if you brought a liver in here, we would all be eating it right now. But I just ate my last one yesterday. So yeah.
You had said earlier that like the heart is a really important part to eat, or I think something about that. Like, what if you were to live in the wild? Like, what's the most nutritious thing like you would go for first?
Probably the easiest thing. Requires least amount of calories and effort. So fish can be pretty easy. That's a passive. I can take fish passively. I can set lines and traps and let those work for me while I'm resting. But if I wanted something very nutritious, liver's great. Most animals eat out those organ meats first, right? That's what they go for. That's where all the vitamins are packed. So that same sort of theory, that's what I want to eat first. And that heart is just pure meat. Unfortunately, there's no fats in it. That's the downside. And where do the animals typically go next? They go to the rump. That's where there's a lot of fat, and that's where there's a little bit more tenderness, if you will. This is just, what I find.
Yeah.
So if I was to take game, you could eat that liver raw. Start working on that heart. You cut off those fat lines, start eating it out. That would definitely be an option. But
okay,
I mean, technically everything's edible.
In
my mind, it's just what happens an hour later might change your perspective.
Where are you? Lana wants to know where you're getting your fiber from. From this all meat diet.
Yeah, so you will have a different bowel movement cycle. That's for sure. But I don't believe you really need. I still have regular bowel movements without any issues. So I think the fiber is kind of one of those things that we believe we need, but I'm still on the regular. I'm not getting cramps. I just don't need to expel as much. The most I've eaten in one day has been like 4.5 pounds of meat. And the next day everything was normal. So I don't think we need as much fiber as we think we need. I think we need a lot more fiber because we eat a lot more junk. And that fiber helps get rid of that junk. When you eat clean and you eat very clean meats, you don't need it as much. I'm not a scientist, but that's just what I'm telling you.
Yeah, that's making me think about the Plains Indian diet as well, because it was like almost all meat, and also fat. The nomads, yeah, okay. So Carleton's people were agriculturalists as well, but on the Western Plains, pemmican, and it's not what a lot of people think, which is like they think it's 50% dried berries or something.
Berries, fat, and meat.
The vast majority of it is fat and meat. And the fat from a grass-fed animal like a buffalo or a grass-fed cow actually has that vitamin C in it, that they're keratin. They're getting that out of the vegetables, the grass that they're eating. And you can see that difference. You can see it in the fat. It's like this chunky orange fat. And so pemmican is that melted down, that tallow from a grass-fed animal mixed with dried shredded meat, and occasionally some very small percentage of dried berries, maybe just to give it some flavor. But they're getting their vitamin C out of the grass-fed animal, and that's what they're eating. It's like all the time.
Are you guys part of the tallow eaters of America, the raw fat eaters?
No.
You should join.
Okay.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah.
This sounds great.
I just started it. No, but like
I'm fully on board.
eating raw animal fat is, I think if you go back way on Instagram and cut out all this stuff, and there's just me eating raw fat, because one, it's high in calories, those good replacement calories. So you run an animal down, you need to replace, you take in those fat calories. And that's awesome. Yeah. I love duck fat's my favorite. Straight fat, yeah. And I mean, there might be a little bit of bits and pieces of meat on there, but it ain't gonna kill you right away.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. I think we're at our hour mark. So,
cool.
I mean, Donnie, what plug? So you got a website?
Yeah. So I have my business website, which is PaleoTracksSurvival.com, that discusses a lot of different classes that I offer, whether they're private classes, some of my calendar classes, as well as you can go to DonnyDust.com. That talks about just TV and film involvement, publications, different lectures and stuff like that I'll be providing. And I have a running blog on there and all sorts of topics, from picking up after yourself out in the bush to living like a hunter-gatherer. So yeah, those are kind of the two sites, and those will lead to a lot of others. But
what's the Instagram handle for all? Because that's where we're big on Instagram.
Yeah,
so
no worries.
it's like Donny Dust.
It's Donny Dust. Let me check real quick. I'm horrible. Donny Dust, just Donny Dust.
Donny Dust. Well,
and one last question.
Yeah.
What is like one piece of advice you'd give to somebody trying to do this, or that's out there in the woods doing something?
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely say your curiosity will lead to your creativity. So as you are walking amongst the wild landscapes of the world and you see things, be curious about them. If you see a cave in the distance, go see what's in it. If you smell something, you hear something, be curious about what it is, because it might lead you to a new creative standpoint. And that's creating a tool, creating an experience, creating a relationship. Just live life to the fullest. And just be curious, be creative, and you get things done.
Usually at the end of our show, we ask if we'd ask our guests if they like to live their life in ruins again. But
yes,
would you like to live? If you had to do it all over again, would you like to live it primitively?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, awesome.
That's my shtick.
Well, dude, this has been great, Donnie. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy you get to come to Boulder and you met up with us, so we get to see all your cool stuff. I'm excited for take you down to the lab and show you what we got going on. So, thank you, everyone. We're out.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, indeed.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.